Oh,
I'd like to call to order the Dana Point City Council meeting Tuesday, November 19th, 2019. Madam Clerk, can you call the order? Call the roll, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All members of the council are present with the exception of Councilmember Vixoric at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Munoz, is there a need for closed session?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. First, we have a conference with legal counsel as a result of anticipated litigation. Due to the significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2, we have one case to discuss. Next, we have a conference with real property negotiator pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8 involving the assessor's parcel 66828301. The agency's negotiator is David Cosgrove and Matt Sinacori. Negotiating parties are the City of Dana Point and Cynthia Holder. Under negotiation of the pricing terms of an agreement related to real property. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, is there any public comment?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I'll close the public comment and I'll recess the City Council meeting until 6 p.m.
Hello, hello, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Welcome to the Dana Point City Council meeting of November 19th, 2019. We will now reconvene our meeting. We will begin with our Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilmember Federico. Please remain standing for the invocation, which will be provided by Associate Pastor John Christie of Capitol Beach Church.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in pledging allegiance to the flag that represents our great nation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before I begin, I want to invite all of you for Thanksgiving dinner. We fed over 300 people last year in a full sit-down 7-course meal. So if you know anybody that doesn't have a place to go, I'm going to leave these with Kathy, but they're just reminders. You don't need anything to walk in, but show up between 12:30 and 3:30. Okay? Would you pray with me, please? Father, as we prepare for Thanksgiving, our thoughts stream with a multitude of images of the abundance of the blessings with which you have given. Time does not allow us to turn in our lists, but you know us well as the recipients of your love and care. But being a group of city lovers, we want to give a shout out of thankfulness for our city. We're thankful for clean air and water, gifts that sustain us for life, ears to hear and eyes to see of the beauty with which we are surrounded, as evidence of your handiwork, a government in which we can participate, founded on the same principles as our nation, leadership that's concerned about our comfort, welfare, and safety. We are thankful for our free will and the opportunity to choose and make choices. May our decisions be pleasing in your sight because we have sought your wisdom and followed your instruction. Amen. Thank you.
There are no presentations or proclamations this evening, so we'll move on to the reading of the ordinances. At this time, the city clerk will read the titles of the ordinances listed on the agenda. City clerk, are there any ordinance titles to read?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I have one large ordinance title to read. Bear with me one second while I get to it. It is for item number 11 or 12, I believe. And it's a first reading of an ordinance entitled, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Dana Point, California, amending chapters 8.02, 8.03, 8.12, 8.14, 8.16, 8.20, 8.24, 8.26, 8.28, 8.30, 8.32, 8.34, 8.36, and 8.38 of Title 8 of the Dana Point Municipal Code, adopting by reference the California Codes of Regulations, Title 24, Parts 1 through 12, known and designated as the 2019 edition of the California Building Code, 2019 edition of the California Residential Code, 2019 edition of the California Electrical Code, 2019 edition of the California Plumbing Code, 2019 edition of the California Mechanical Code, 2019 edition of the California Administrative Code, 2019 edition of the California Reference Standards Code, 2019 edition of the California Energy Code, 2019 edition of the California Green Building Standards Code, 2019 edition of the California Historical Building Code, 2019 edition of the California Existing Building Code, and the 2019 edition of the California Fire Code, making amendments thereto and related actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. That brings us to the consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and all will be enacted by one roll call vote. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the City Council, the public, or staff request specific items to be removed from the consent calendar for separate action. Are there any items to be removed by the public?
No, Mr. Mayor.
By staff?
No, sir.
Council? All right, we'll go ahead and I'll move the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, any opposition? Passes unanimously. Thank you. This is on to public comments. There will be a 3-minute time limit per person and an overall time limit of 30 minutes for the public comments portion of the agenda. At the mayor's discretion, the balance of public comments will be heard after the new business portion of the agenda. All comments are to be directed to the city council and shall not consist of any personal attacks. Members of the public are expected to maintain professional, courteous decorum during their comments. State law prohibits the city council from taking action on specific items unless it appears on the posted agenda. The city clerk will distribute any handouts you may have. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. We have a few public comments tonight. We're going to start with Patty Short, followed by Bobby McDonald and Nancy Leonard.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council and staff. My name is Patty Short. I'm a resident of Dana Point, and tonight I'm here on behalf of the Dana Point 5th Marine Regiment Support Group. This is the season of Thanksgiving, and those of us on the board of the Dana Point 5th Marine Support Group want to say thank you to the city of Dana Point and its leaders for the support that you've given us since the inception of the organization in 2004. It's really important to express gratitude. What a way to start off the Thanksgiving holiday. In 2018, the Dana Point 5th Marine Regiment Support Group, so mouthful, I'll call it the 5th Marines. The 5th Marines partnered with a group of volunteers to have fabricated, transport, and install a Vietnam War memorial to those sailors and Marines who were victims of the Vietnam War that were members of the 5th Marines. At that time, we raised several $1,000s in support monies, and the city of Dana Point participated. Sometimes we're a little slow to say thank you. So tonight, on behalf of the Dana Point 5th Marines, I'd like to present this to the city of Dana Point. In sincere appreciation of your significant dedication and commitment to the Vietnam War Memorial, 5th Marine Regiment Memorial Garden, Camp Pendleton, dedicated on Memorial Day, May 28, 2018. Marines never forget their fallen brothers, and you have helped us keep the promise. Semper Fidelis. Thank you. I'm going to give this to you.
Thank you, Ms. Short. You know, this is the first time I've had one of these presented directly to me. This is really special. I know this is for the entire council, but we really do appreciate everything our Marines have done for us and our sailors and along with our soldiers and our airmen. So it's a small thing that we can do to support our veterans, and we appreciate everything you do for them. And it's absolutely our privilege and pleasure to support you in anything you can. So thank you very much for this, and I'll get it to the clerk and we'll hang it somewhere. Prominently. Thank you so much. Bobby McDonald, please.
In the spirit of gratitude, Mr. Mayor and Honorable Council, my name is Bobby McDonald. I chair the Orange County Veterans Advisory Council. I'm also here representing the Orange County Veterans and Military Collaborative, and I am a Vietnam veteran of the United States Navy. All right. We put together a 4-pager for our city council members and our council members for leadership, those that are in leadership in the county. So if you take a look at the brochure I gave you, on the inside page, we talk about the Board of Supervisors, those representing us in the service of the city councils. You're my second city council that I have visited. I went to Mission Viejo last week because they had 2 city council members that were veterans. I'm here because of Mr. Pachorik, Mr. Federico, both Marines who are on that. So we have 3 city councils, as I said, that have 2 veterans on them. But as you can see, we have the federal offices and the state offices that have us represented in the county for with veterans. On page 3 there, the Orange County Veteran Advisory Council kind of gives you the hierarchy of how we're stated here in Orange County for veterans, with the Orange County Veteran Service Office, then the Orange County Veterans and Military Collaborative, and on down the line with Heroes Hall Association, United States Army, VLI. Then we have the OC for Vets program there, which allows us to do the services for our veterans, both behavioral and mental. And then, of course, I put on there all the way up to page 4, all the community colleges and colleges that have veterans resource centers in our county. So it kind of gives you an overview of all the things we have going on with the veterans here in the county. This is the first time we've done it, and we wanted to kind of start it off and do it during Veterans Day and Veterans Week. The last and final thing that I'd like to bring up is on the back page. It shows you the Orange County veteran priorities that we have put out together for 2019, 2020. And again, from homelessness, PTSD, suicides, those types of things, financial charities that are local, helps local veterans, and the other things that we're looking for, you have there. With that, we at the bottom, our motto is, have we helped a veteran today? And I am very, very proud to say thank you very kindly for let me be here today to tell you this. And we're here to help. And thank you for your service, Jim. Okay.
Thank you very much. Nancy Leonard, followed by Felicia.
Nancy Leonard, Dana Point. Good evening. I've attended a number of council meetings here over the last few years since we moved here. And I have to say that I've really been appalled at the conduct of some of our council members and city staff, at speakers who address the council, whether it's on consent calendar items, whether it's on public hearings, whatever the process may be. Every person that comes to this podium, whether you like them or not, whether you agree with them or not, deserves your attention and deserves a look, okay? Not a look at your computer, not a look at some staff report, but a look and a consideration for what they're saying. This is a democracy. This is democracy in action. And I think we all recognize that this is a very precious commodity we have here. And Ms. Lewis, Mr. Wyatt, Mr. Federico, I've always noticed that you do pay attention, whether you agree with the speaker or not. I do respect that. And there's a number of staff members here that do as well, but there are quite a few that don't. And out of respect for these staff members, I am not going to name names. This is a public service that you have chosen as your career, or as an elected official, you have chosen to serve the public. And you've sacrificed a lot to do that. You know my background, I had done the same. But if I had behaved in my city council meetings as the way some people here do, I would have been out of a job. If I did not look at the speaker, if I did not acknowledge their presence, I would have been fired by my city manager in a heartbeat. It is not appropriate. Now, there are occasions where you need to look at your computer, where you need to look at a staff report, because you're responding to something that's going on at the council. I get that. But really, other than that, for those 3 minutes that person is speaking, there is nothing more important in this room than that person speaking at the podium. And that person in turn deserves the attention, deserves the look that everybody, that you all expect from us, but we also expect it from you. Your salaries, your contracts are paid by taxpayers. Never forget that. You serve us. This is Public Administration 101. You are public servants, and that may seem old-fashioned. That's the way I was taught, but that's what you are. And you serve everybody, whether they voted for you or not, whether you agree with them or not. Thank you.
Felicia Lernis, followed by Julian Joshua.
Hi, good evening. I'm assuming you're calling me as Felicia Lerner. I was actually I'm coming up to speak about the short-term rentals. I don't know if this is the right time right now, but
If you would like to speak on short-term rentals, you can wait for the item to be.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, I'll go ahead and give this back to you. Julian Joshua.
Good evening. Dana Point's mission is to set the standard for an exceptionally livable city. One of our neighboring cities has years ago passed a non-discriminatory ordinance to regulate sober living homes. Another one has, for about the last 20 years, had a workable view ordinance which protects the livability of the city. When does Dana Point intend to follow suit, and what measures are you going to announce to do so?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any additional public comments? Sorry.
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public comment section. It brings us to the public hearings. That's item 12, adoption by reference, the California Codes of Regulations, Title 24, Parts 1 through 12, known and designated as the 2019 edition of the California Building Code, 2019 edition of, I'm not going to read all this, this is the building code update. So, Mr. Denny, do we have a staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's my pleasure to introduce our new building official, Joe Romero, who will be bringing your staff report this evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Joe Romero. I'm your new building official of Dana Point. And today I am introducing and presenting for adoption the California Building Codes with amendments. Let me see, I go to the next slide here.
Excuse me, Mr. Johnson, can you put the other, thank you.
So I want to make a real brief overview of the adoption of the Dana Point Municipal Code. And this is what I'm presenting here is a flow chart showing the process. It all starts off from the International Model Codes, goes through the California Commission standards, and then it gets put into the California Building Codes. From there, we work with local jurisdictions, local area jurisdictions, and we come up with local amendments to work within our environment. And we present today with amendments for adoption. Some of the key features of the code adoption process, which is a routine process. Every 3 years, the state publishes a new code. The California Building Standards Code governs all the construction within the building in the state. Every city in California is mandated to adopt the codes. And the state will go into effect January 1st, 2020 with or without local adoption. The city then may amend the local code to address local conditions. That's all I have for you today. And I'll be willing to take any questions if there is any. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the council at this point? Madam Clerk, any public comments?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I'll close the public hearing. That was quick. Thank you. I'll move the item. Second. Any discussion on this item? No? Okay. We'll go ahead and take the vote. All right, that passes unanimously. That brings us to that brings us to new business. Item 13, award of contract for parks, medians, and parkway landscape maintenance. Mr. Denny, you have staff report. Yes, sir. I got to get back to there you go.
Yes, sir. In lieu of Mr. Sedita's absence, I'll go ahead and cover this for him. We're having continued technical difficulties in the room. But this is the bid for the Parks and Medians Landscape Maintenance Contract. We did receive 4 bids. The incumbent Soto Company was the low bidder. Their bid came in under the amount that we've got budgeted for these services, and we recommend approval of the action tonight.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any public comments?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and move the item. Second. Do we have any questions or discussion by council? Get your button. Okay, Ms. Lewis.
Okay, so I see that the soda company is the low bid, $1.2 million. Under the next one is $1.4 million, Merchants Landscape. So I have a question. When we get a bid, So we've used Soto for quite a while. When we get a bid, do we have a sense of, do they come in at the bid and that's actually the price we wind up paying during the year? Or did they just give us a low bid and we wind up paying a lot more so that the $1.4 million might be competitive?
The contract before you tonight is for a total of $1,320,000, which includes a 10% contingency amount. If we go above that amount, we have to come back to City Council and ask your permission. So, and I don't believe we've done so in the Soto contract in the last 5 years.
Okay.
It's possible in extraordinary circumstances if there's work that comes up that has to get done, but it's also probably likely that we would separately bid that work as opposed to having our maintenance contractor do the work.
Okay, so I guess maybe I didn't ask this clearly. The difference is a couple $100,000 between the Soto and the merchants.
Correct.
My question is, are we confident that this $1.2 million is actually what it will wind up being?
Yes.
Okay. And we take the low bid because we're required to?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Okay, go ahead and take the vote. And that passes unanimously 5-0. That brings us to award of contract for sports field maintenance. Mr. Denny, do you have a report? Or who
I'll
we
ask
getting
Mr.
on?
Sedita to cover this one. All right.
I'm back. Sorry for that. As mentioned in the prior, we are going out to bid as part of our strategic plan goal to reassess our contracts and see what's best for the city. We currently contract with professional sports field maintenance for maintenance of the Del Obispo ball fields, Lantern Bay Bocce courts, and Dana Hills High School baseball fields, and have done so since 2004. Staff made some minor modifications based off a review, the reduction on the aeration, as well as some general maintenance in the off season to see about some cost savings there. From that, staff issued an RFP on October 8th, received 4 proposals, from one from Professional Sports Field Maintenance, Mariposa, Brightview, and Merchants Landscape Maintenance. Upon review, staff deemed Professional Sports Field Maintenance as the lowest responsible bidder. Their bid was $134,400. We currently have $160,000 budgeted for this item. Based off that, staff is recommending an initial 6-month contract be awarded to finish out the fiscal year for $75,000. And then authorization for the city manager to extend that contract annually at $150,000, which covers a 11% contingency, still keeping it below the budgeted allotment for any emergency repairs that may come up. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any public comment on this item?
No, Mr. Mayor.
I'll go ahead and move the item.
Second.
Council, Ms. Lewis.
Thank you. Okay, so I see the bids are 134 up to 698,000. Any reason that we have this incredible range?
It's everything's set for staffing allocations that we requested and everything. A lot of it just comes down to employee pay, and services, but they're not really services, but it's Professional Sports Field Management, has been doing this for many years, and we are their flagship location. So I think they know kind of what they're getting into, as well as it's the turf maintenance does require specific mowing machines and everything. We have it set so something that's mowing turf outside isn't going to be mowing the ball fields, because then you're getting weeds brought in, additional grasses that we don't want in there. So a lot of this does with these newer contractors has machinery purchases, et cetera.
Have they been doing ours for years?
Professional Sports Field, they've been doing it since 2004.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Thank you for asking that question. That was my exact question. We have $134,000 and the next one is $220,000 more. And so thanks for clarifying why they may be doing it for that. So with that, I'll go ahead and take the vote. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And that brings us to item 15, Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt, approval of actions required to put a short-term rental ordinance into effect. Mr. Denny, I guess we're going to go with Mr. Wyatt for the staff report on this one. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. So staff report is part of the overall agenda package, but I would like to at least run through the highlights of that I think are most critical to bring out here to start the discussion on this. I think first of all, the recommended action is that the City Council approve all of the following recommended actions that establish the process and approvals that must take place before a short-term rental ordinance can go into effect in Dana Point. And those recommended actions are: 1, that the resident survey be conducted, results made public, and results reviewed at a council meeting. This direction's already been given, but I just want to put it on there as one of the steps that we agree we're following. The second step would be for the council to pass a short-term rental ordinance that would not become effective until approved by the California Coastal Commission and voted on and approved by a simple majority of the Dana Point voters. The third recommended action is that the California Coastal Commission approve the ordinance passed by the city without material changes. And the fourth is that the ballot measure on the ordinance is approved by a simple majority of the Dana Point voters. Issue-wise on this, and the reason for getting it on the calendar, this is a long process. I think when we started it, realizing how long it would take, and we recognize that government doesn't move fast, but this seemed to move slower than most, and sort of questions come in repeatedly about what takes so long, when will it be done, when can I expect things. So transparent what the process is, what the issues are, getting a plan out is important. If it goes to the voters, if we agree that it should, and it does, the very soonest that we could expect that to happen is November 2020. Looking at the backing up from there of the things that have to happen between then, that's a very tight date. So if we would like for it to go to the voters and would hope to get it on, we have to really carefully lay out and manage to a calendar of things that must happen to get there. And I thought this was a good time for us to start to agree on what that process is and lay out the calendar. Background-wise, I think most people know, but on July 19th, 2013, the City Council did pass a short-term rental ordinance that would be to go into effect on January 15th, 2014. However, the passage was contingent on acceptance by the California Coastal Commission and included the following caution. And this is directly from the resolution that passed it. However, in the event that the California Coastal Commission does not approve the local coastal plan amendment associated with the proposed zone text amendment, short-term rental uses in the coastal zone will remain illegal, and presumably action to preclude them will follow. Importantly, compliance with the operating regulations ordinance, including obtaining a short-term rental permit, will not be deemed sufficient to allow a short-term rental use to continue in the event the California Coastal Commission denies the zone text amendment in the coastal zone districts. Hence, any person desiring to operate a short-term rental ordinance prior to all zoning changes becoming effective will be doing so at their own risk, knowing that they are violating current city regulations, which may not be changed if the Coastal Commission does not grant its approval. In the spring of 2016, the Coastal Commission finally responded to that 2013 ordinance that went into effect with material changes. And on November 15th, 2016, due to the success of a citizens referendum, the council quote, rescinded and repealed the ordinance. At the time that ordinance was rescinded and repealed, In addition to rescinding and repealing the zone text amendment and the local coast amendment, the council at that time directed staff to begin working on a process to allow the council and community to evaluate a means by which to adopt zoning regulations acceptable to the community that would allow short-term rentals and which could be sent to the Coastal Commission for consideration. And in the meantime, continue to allow those holding short-term rental permits to operate consistent with their permits in the same manner as previously directed by the council, but cease issuing any new permits until the zoning issues are resolved. I bring this up because this question comes up repeatedly, especially to us on the short-term rental subcommittee. This direction resulted in the formation of a short-term rental subcommittee on March 20th, 2018. And I, myself, and Council Member John Tomlinson were appointed as the council members to the subcommittee. At the first meeting of the subcommittee, we had a significant debate about what the charter was and how to proceed. And based on the issues that arose from the first ordinance, the subcommittee basically set two things that they thought needed to happen before they brought a proposed ordinance for consideration back to the council. One, it needed to have been accepted by California Coastal Commission staff. And two, it needed to have a very high probability of being accepted by the residents of Dana Point when put to a vote. Now, commenting on that, we did not in that meeting. So first of all, the Coastal Commission staff, which we met with, did, of course, tell us that whatever recommendations they would make to us didn't guarantee that the actual commission would vote to agree with them when it went before them. So all we could do until that is go to the staff, and until we put it before for a vote, even though staff would recommend it, the California Coastal Commission itself could, in fact, still not approve it. And secondly, we did not, at that point, decide, nor did we have the right to decide, that this ordinance had to go to a vote. But we did say that if we didn't think that it had a high probability of passing, if it went to a vote, we shouldn't bring it to the council. And that means we needed to do homework on that. So that puts us really where we are now. Okay. To clarify now, as we start to get ready, and we've done a lot of work with the Coastal Commission, we've passed a survey to get, we put out a survey, or we've agreed to put out a survey to get additional input from our audience. The staff report itself lists all the work that was done by the subcommittee, and especially to city staff who really carried the bulk of the work in this effort. And now we're starting to get to that period to say if we're going to wrap up and get it back and get a proposal to council in time to get it on the ballot, and we decide we want to do that, we have to wrap this process up and move it forward. So that's the reason for the proposal. The reason I brought it down to tonight is I want to remove, I want to clarify the understanding of exactly what it will take to get there and agree to it as a council so that we can put together a plan to move forward and wrap this ordinance up and see what we can bring to them at that sets between the Coastal Commission and our residents, to make sure that we look to find out where that agreement between the two of them really works for everybody. And so that's our hope, and that's where we are right now.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt. Madam Clerk, do I have public comments? Okay, we have 20 speakers here tonight. That'll put us at about an hour, maybe a little bit longer. So in interest of respecting everybody's time, if your comments are the same as something that you just heard, you can make that note and maybe not use your full 3 minutes. However, you are entitled to use the 3 minutes if you wish. So our first 3 speakers are going to be Barbara Wilson, Sandy Iverson, and Jeannie McKnight. Joni McKnight. Got it. Thanks.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. I'm Barbara Wilson from Dana Point. It's most important that Dana Point residents have a right to vote on short-term rental policy. For most of us, our homes are our most valuable asset. And as a realtor, I can assure you that home buyers are very concerned about neighbors. They frequently ask questions to determine whether an environment will allow them to peacefully enjoy their home. An article in Realtor magazine titled Airbnb Crashing Neighborhood stated, a single family home or a condo next door to a short-term rental where the occupants change every few days will likely take longer to sell and at a lower price. With real estate disclosures more stringent, sellers must disclose whether there's noise, nuisances, or parking congestion, which could affect the desirability of their home. In my opinion, short-term rental property values hurt the adjacent homes. Recently in Orinda, California, an STR licensed for 13 people was the site of a wild party for 100 guests. A shooting occurred and 5 people were tragically killed and many more injured. There had been 2 previous documented complaints to the city code enforcement officials that were basically ignored. As we speak, Orinda has just received the first of what will undoubtedly be many lawsuits from those affected and their families. Orinda has just instituted a moratorium on STRs and is ready to revise their policy. Is this really what we want to risk in Dana Point? You may say I'm exaggerating the risk of disruption to quality of life in neighborhoods, but before you discount what I'm saying, I challenge you to go on Airbnb and VRBO platforms and scan the homes offered in Dana Point. How would you like to live next to these? Capo Beach, 8 bedrooms, 5 baths, sleeps 20. Dana Point, City Center, 10 bedrooms, 7 baths. Dana Point House with a View, 14 guests and 4 bedrooms. Cottage by the Harbor, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, 7 guests. Capo Paradise, 2 bedroom, 2 bath, sleeps 8. We also risk a proliferation of STRs by Airbnb in 2020 as they issue a new public offering, which will bring millions and perhaps billions of dollars to expand their platform and enable them to purchase properties for STRs. Do we want to make our city a haven for investors? Residents demand input and a vote on any future ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandy Iverson. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Apparently is it a button on actually on there that'll raise up the podium or lower it as needed?
Oh, so you're not.
Thank you. I didn't even know.
When Carol Wilson comes up, though.
I thought they did that. That's funny. All right. Ms. Iverson, go ahead.
Sorry, I couldn't. Good evening. I'm Sandy Iverson and have been a resident of Capistrano Beach as both a homeowner and a long-term renter for over 30 years. Both homeowners and renters have a huge stake in what you decide tonight on this motion. A change in the current STR policy could seriously alter the stability of our neighborhoods and change property values. Homeowners are concerned about lower property values and renters are worried about an already limited inventory that could be diminished with more lucrative short-term rentals. How can you even contemplate this ordinance when the state of California is issuing mandates for cities to develop more housing units, not less of them? As a longtime active member, and also I'm a board member of the Dana Point Historical Society, I would like to point out that our city wasn't much of a tourist attraction prior to the harbor being built in the 70s. Before that, visitors were more likely to bring a trailer, tent, camp out on the beach, or stay in one of the modest motels that were dotted along we still have one we're trying to save. And that's how we had visitors here. We have had a much more significant history, though, of hosting visitors in our large hotels, and I might add, many of which are world-class resorts and are recognized as such. We are the envy of surrounding cities because of these hotels and what they bring to the city's budget. TOT from our hotels is so huge that it virtually pays our entire bill for police services, and that doesn't begin to count the impact on tourist dollars and sales tax. How can you justify wanting to compete with the industry that provides our city's bread and butter? And what do you tell the hotel managers the reason why you're doing it? Your first duty is to the residents of Dana Point, owners and renters alike, who are also voters, not the outside dark money PACs that influenced the last election. We deserve a chance to vote on an ordinance that affects our very way of life. Thank you and good evening.
Please hold your applause. Please hold your applause. Joni McKnight, followed by our next three speakers will be Tony Nelson, Sherm Cuono, and Betty Hill.
Hi, my name's Joni McKnight. I live in Niguel Beach Terrace. We used to call that the Rich Projects because it was affordable housing. The Coastal Commission put that together so that people like me, teachers could live in the community you served. Right now, that's almost impossible. Affordable housing is becoming, Southern California is becoming a place to leave because you can't afford to live here. In the Ritz projects that I live in now, there's almost no young people around anymore, no little kids, because young people can't afford to live there. So as far as affordable housing / homelessness being a huge agenda item, and the Coastal Commission, this was their idea to build this. It was controversial at the time to put in something that close to the beach. But they just felt like, well, if you're going to work here, why shouldn't you, enjoy this community? I know because I was on the HOA board, I'm not anymore, but I was, and I know in order to change the CC&Rs in an HOA community, that's like changing the Constitution. And you need a vote of all of the people. You can't just have whoever happens to be on the HOA board make that decision. It's got to go to all of the HOA owners. And because making a zoning change in the city would be the exact same kind of analogy, this should go to the city of Dana Point. And I'm not sure if that includes voting districts, which was the last thing I actually showed up here for when I was like, what's that? And now it's like, okay, I hope that this will be a citywide vote, and I'm still not clear on whether it will be a voting district thing. I don't think we need a poll because I helped do the referendum, and there was a referendum put out with 40% of the voters saying, no, we don't want this. Put it on the ballot. Let's let it vote. Let it go to a vote. Deborah asked for it to go to a vote, didn't get seconded. And it, with this should go to a vote in order for something like this to, let's put it this way. Anything that's going to affect the titles to people's property, the nature of the property, that should go to a vote of everybody in the city. What's going to be done with the data from that poll? Who's going to conduct it? How are they going to conduct it? Could it be used for propaganda? Is it going to be used for propaganda? Is it going to be a mailer? What's a sign-in poll anyway? What is that? Do you sit in front of the grocery store and sign in? So I'm not sure we need a poll, but if we are going to do that, how are we going to do that? Who's going to get to speak? So does that mean my time is up?
That's it. That's your 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Please. Tony Nelson.
I can go up.
If you want to, hit the button.
Oh, this is great. I like this. Oh, I had a great big one. It filled the whole page. Okay, you can hardly read that. Good evening. My name is Tony Nelson, Capistrano Beach. I asked Kathy Ward to display our city motto on the screen, which was really big on my sheet, but it isn't anymore. But it says, Dana Point's mission is to set the standard for an exceptionally livable city. Note the word livable. This suggests that it is the city's #1 priority to serve those who live here, not those who visit or those who develop here or invest here. They're all important. But that mission says that you serve those who live in Dana Point. That means us, your constituents, the 34,000 residents who call Dana Point our home. The city made a promise to us in the form of our residential zoning. When we moved here, none of us worried about commercial businesses operating in our neighborhoods because we live in areas that are zoned residential. That means something. Commercial activities happen in commercial areas. Residential areas are for residents. We thought it was clear. Our neighborhoods were designed for long-term residents. Whether we rent or own, we are neighbors. We are people who are engaged in the community, whose kids attend our schools, and who care about our neighbors and our streets, and we try to live together in harmony, maintaining the peaceful enjoyment of our homes. And those homes, for most of us, are our single most valuable financial asset, and you're messing with that. I applaud Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt for placing this item on the agenda. It is vital that any change in the residential zoning of our homes should not happen without the explicit agreement of residents. Just as in most HOAs, where a 2/3 majority in most cases is needed to change CC&Rs, the city's zoning represents a promise that should not be broken without a vote of the majority of those affected. Dana Point's move to districting changed our representation in a huge way. We now have little say in who makes the most important decisions for our city and for us. In fact, we can vote for only 1 of 5 of you. Please do not presume to think that we'll be okay with any 3-person majority making such a sweeping change to the zoning of our homes, especially a majority, no matter who makes up the majority. You are a majority that none of us can vote for or recall. We only have 1 vote, that's it. And we're counting on 3 of you to represent us, and when we can't even vote for you. If you truly believe your mission is to create an exceptionally livable city, like it says up there, please start by letting those of us who live here have a say in how we live and with whom.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson.
To let us vote.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Ms.
Let us-
Nelson. Sherry, I'm sorry, Sherry Como? Kuno, I'm sorry. Your R's and I's came together. I thought it was an M.
Bring this up a little bit. Sorry. Make jokes when I'm nervous. There we go. I'm here to speak on behalf of the guests that stay in my vacation rental. I'm an owner. I'm part of this livable city. But the people who work here, the ones that run the whale watching tours and the restaurants and the gift shops that the guests that stay, the families that stay at my place, they're looking for a comfortable place that they cannot get when they bring their kids, their families, their parents to Dana Point to enjoy the beautiful beaches, the restaurants that we all enjoy. I hear time and time again how wonderful it is to stay in a home when you go on a vacation. I know when I go on vacation, I use Airbnb or VRBO because it is so much more comfortable to have your kids in the other room, not worrying about having 2 separate rooms at a hotel. Being able to cook a meal if you need to cook a meal, or make a quick, sandwich when you headed to the beach. And one of the things I don't hear is about the tourists that come to Dana Point, that make Dana Point one of the wonderful places to visit.
that why we're listed as one of the great beaches. So when you talk about livable, the people who work down at the harbor, the jobs that they count on these tourists to support them, to, pay their paychecks. We have to think about that. We have to think about the visitors that come here and not be an elitist community where we're snobs and say, only us and not anyone else. It would be sad to live in a community where that's the type of attitude that we have. So I'm here today to speak on behalf of the vacation renters and also on the vacationers that come and enjoy our great city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Betty Hill, followed by Susan Christensen, Jeanette Krieger, and Carla Moore.
Good evening. I'm Betty Hill from Dana Point. Residents should be allowed to vote on the STR policy. This council is in a very difficult position. As countless cities are seeing, the STR issue is complicated and controversial. Thanks to the residents of Dana Point, the referendum averted a disaster, an STR disaster. It would best serve the residents, the city government, and even this council to allow residents to vote on the STR policy. With respect to residents, without allowing residents to vote, the council would again be forcing residents to give up their longstanding property rights without a say in return for the risks of the possibility of having an STR operating next door or being evicted for an STR. Regarding government, the policy would hugely expand Dana Point's city government and services. The city would have the responsibility of administering the policy, confronting online sites, particularly Airbnb, and enforcing the requirements needed to protect residents from bad actors or situations that will undoubtedly occur. And the council itself will be judged on how it deals with the special interests that surfaced in the 2018 election. Residents could see the policy as a big win for investors, the real estate industry, and STR advocates that would be profiting at their expense. Imposing a policy, as the council tried to do in 2016, could only make matters worse. Most significantly, denying a vote could imply that the council believes voters would find the policy objectionable. The members of this council would change, but residents will be living for decades with your STR policy, and residents deserve a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne Christensen.
Good evening, council members, and thank you for being here. All right, fundamental property rights state that you should be able to buy, rent, or sell a property. Limiting renting is taking away one of those three rights. And further regulations beyond registration or licensing and inspection can be dangerous to our rights as all homeowners. Obviously, many condo buildings and planned communities have their own restrictions relating to rentals and their CC&Rs. We are not discussing these. Communities grow and change and flex to meet the needs of people who live in them, as well as for people who visit them. Sharing our community, and in some cases, our homes, helps to foster an economically healthy and prosperous and friendly community for all residents. From people flying in from all parts of the globe to experience our beautiful city, to people traveling cross country, maybe with big dogs that may need a backyard, to nurses working temporary contracts at hospitals, to local residents in need of temporary housing, while having their own homes repaired or remodeled. It would be nice if we could collaborate harmoniously between vacation rental owners and their managers and those opposed to them. It seems that the approximately 150 homes that are currently permitted, properly inspected for safety, and abiding by all the rules, as well as paying substantial taxes on a quarterly basis, are in fact making that effort already. It also seems reasonable that those who are opposed would at least acknowledge this rather than taking an all or nothing attitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeanette Krieger.
Hi, my name's Jeanette Kruger. I'm a resident of Dana Point. I have been renting my properties for short-term rentals for the past 10 years. My neighbors have never complained. Actually, my neighbors enjoy the people coming from other countries and have taken them on different tours. And I feel like I've done a service to the community. And the fear tactic of saying, okay, about short-term rentals, mass shootings, I think is, very exaggerated. And we hope and pray that it does never happen in our city, as well as we hope it would never happen in one of our high schools. And I think that's not a very good comparison to be talking about short-term rentals. Apart from the fact they have always been here. I came here in 1970, and I used to clean short-term rentals. It's nothing new. And the mass hysteria that all these yobbos are coming to stay in our homes is really untrue. And I think the police reports substantiate that. So I'd just like it to be fair and honest in everybody's thoughts on this, and that it's a service that we provide. And as Suzanne said, we also boost up the revenue. Pretty much the short-term rentals are in June, July, and August. Mostly in the winter, we go to month, which is not a problem. So in those 3 months, the holiday season, yeah, we have free transportation. We want to cater to the tourists. So let's continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Carla Moore, followed by George Ray, Elizabeth Ray, and Miriam Rupke.
Thank you. I'm addressing the council on behalf of the 10 vacation rentals that I manage for the owners. As a hands-on small business owner, we provide a valued service to families that want a vacation in a clean, quiet home and enjoy some private family time. We also service the local community by providing temporary shelter to those displaced from their homes for a various degree of reasons. A lot of slab leaks around this area. The previously discussed home sharing plan is not a viable option for any of the people that rent my vacation homes. Home sharing is a viable option for a very small minority of visitors. We want to attract a demographic that will go to the restaurants, go to the attractions, shops, and add to the tax base. I am in support of the short-term rental ordinance going to a public vote, but only if the city drafts a new ordinance that involves short-term rental owners. The subcommittee drafting this ordinance needs to be comprised of members of the short-term rental community, not just members that are already predisposed to eliminating short-term rentals. Finally, those of us that run successful short-term rentals with no complaints or disruption to neighbors do not wish to be lumped together with a very small minority of problem homes. We are willing to be policed with an escalation process for complaints. The city had a great program for that under the previous permit process, and it worked. Let's go back and revisit that. Thank you.
Thank you. George Ray.
Good evening, Councilman, and Councilwoman. I'm also an operator and owner of a short-term rental. To characterize, obviously, all the rentals as having all kinds of problems, or quite frankly, we've had more problems when we had our apartments were long-term renters, had much more problems with them than we ever had with short-term rental people. My wife will go in great detail who our customers are that I think that we serve a different niche than what's in the hotels. And we serve a different clientele. May also notice that I think there are approximately, don't hold me to the number, I think over 17,000 residences in Dana Point. There were no more than 300 permits issued. There's only 153 operating today. So we're a very small niche of serving, but we do serve an important role in serving Dana Point, which is a community that makes its money on hotels and all of the other businesses that we serve. And so I think we're a small part of it. We do support the ordinance. We also support stringent rules and having to police us. I also personally support that we shouldn't have them in blocks and blocks together. They should be spread out. I also think that we do have some property rights and that anything that once we go down a slippery slope completely, that I think it can, do you then stop home operating businesses? Because they're operating businesses in houses too. You have an ordinance that allows for that. So are you going to stop them? Or are we going to go out and say, well, we should have a home ownership, so maybe we shouldn't have any rentals? I'm being sarcastic now, but just trying to make a point. Lastly, I do think that we do also hire a lot of people. I mean, we own people that we serve, our cleaning people, some of our gardening people that we probably wouldn't have, a lot of other issues that we do support. We support the economy, not just ourselves, but everyone else. So at the end, I do think that we do want involvement, as was previously said. I will not echo it, within the survey and what's being surveyed, and more importantly, with the ordinances being prepared. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth Ray.
I'm the better half.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you please state your name and city of residence,
yes,
please?
I'm Elizabeth Ray, resident of Capistrano Beach. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My husband, George Ray, and I have owned and operated several short-term rentals in Capistrano Beach for over 4 years now. We are totally in favor of putting an ordinance concerning short-term rentals to a vote. However, I strongly feel that there needs to be an input from short-term rental owners in the formation of this ordinance. I think it is unfair for 2 council members to compose this ordinance behind closed doors for 2 years without any collaboration from short-term rental owners. We also feel that there should be a limited number of short-term rentals in our communities. Currently, as my husband said, there are 153 licensed short-term rentals in Dana Point, which is less than 1% of the households. We agree with limiting the number to a licensed small number so that our communities are not impacted significantly. We also would want the ordinance rules concerning noise, trash, smoking, or other issues to apply to all Dana Point residences, whether they are permanent owners, permanent renters, or short-term renters. Since 1988, when my husband bought our properties here in Capistrano Beach, we have had more problems with our long-term renters and owners than we've ever had with our short-term renters. We've not had one complaint in over 4 years from the police, from the city, or our neighbors. Not one concerning our short-term rentals. We certainly have had noisy parties, police arrests for illegal drug use, and domestic arguments. I had one the week before last from our long-term neighbors. We short-term rental owners are Dana Point's ambassadors. We welcome our guests. We recommend restaurants like Luciana's, the Coastal Kitchen, and activities like the Ocean Institute and Baby Beach. We offer our guests a home-like environment with full kitchens, yards for kids and dogs, barbecues for cookouts, and 2 bedrooms so they don't have to rent 2 hotel rooms. Free laundry services. No hotel, no matter how much they charge, can offer the personal touch that and home-like welcome and environment that we provide. Our guests don't fit in hotels. They need these amenities, and they would not come to Dana Point without them, and they tell me that all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Miriam, I think I get this right. Rupke, thank you. Followed by Melissa Spangler, Carol Wilson, and Felicia Lernis.
Good evening, council members. My name is Miriam Rupke. I live in Capistrano Beach, and I am in favor with this going to a public vote. And to relay what some of the other comments have been made is that we want this to be a fair ordinance and we want to be included in the process. And again, having two people behind closed doors drafting something like the home share or homestay option, which I think majority of us aren't doing. Last time when we asked, the council wasn't able to give us what percentage of current STR owners are actually doing a home share. So I think, we need to be a part of this process as well. My husband, and then I also want to address some of the false statements that have been made from previous comments. This statement that we're all outside investors is just not true. My husband and I are residents of Dana Point. We live here. My husband served in the Marine Corps for 9 years, 2 tours to Iraq to protect the freedoms of everyone in this room. And we worked hard and we saved money to purchase our first home together. And it isn't cheap to buy in Dana Point, especially for 2 younger people. So I understand that it's hard to find affordable housing to rent. It's also hard to buy. And when we purchased, we bought with the intent that we were going to short-term rent our duplex because that was the only way that we could afford it. There was a permit process in place. We came to the city. We checked before we even made the offer that this was something that we could do. So we did our due diligence. In addition to the comment that short-term rentals, the wild party that went out of control in a short-term rental, that's not just limited to short-term rentals. There are plenty of long-term renters who have homes where parties have gotten out of control. So do we just, abolish renting altogether? I'm also a licensed realtor. So to the comment that being next to a short-term rental is going to reduce your market value, I haven't seen that. If anything, short-term rentals are better maintained than some homes that have long-term tenants. And if anything, that's increasing the market value in the neighborhood. And then to the other statement about the referendum, I was there during the referendum, next to the paid signature gatherers, literally listening to a paid signature gatherer tell a Dana Point resident, sign here if you want to protect Dana Point against crime against women, children, and elderly. So, even though those opposed to short-term rentals got their signatures, it was far from fair because the information that was shared during that time was inaccurate. So I'm all for this going to a public vote, but please make it fair and please include us in the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Melissa Spangler.
Good evening, council persons.
Could you state your city of residence?
Melissa Spangler, Capistrano Beach. And I also participate, my parents own a short-term vacation rental here in Capistrano Beach. And we've had amazing experiences there. I manage it, I take care of it. And we've done it for 10 years. And it didn't turn out that, we bought this home to be a business. No, this is the home that I was raised in. This is the home that I have amazing memories in. Went to Palisades Elementary School. This is where my children come and played. This is where my grandson will come and play. It's a home and a property that we are blessed that we get to share with other people. And if you abolish the idea of having short-term rentals, you're tremendously hurting our community. And you're hurting our community in the opportunity to be able to share what we know as Dana Point with not just our little area, but with the world. I've had renters in here from Russia, from Scotland, from Mexico, Argentina. I've had people from all over the world, and they're amazing people. I had a family come with a child and a big dog, and they stayed for a month. I wouldn't have needed a short-term rental for a month rental. Sometimes we have longer, sometimes we have shorter. But the experiences that they have here are priceless and they're amazing. And when I travel, I also use short-term rentals and vacation rentals. And it's a way to see and blend in with the community, to talk to not where the tourists go per se, but also the locals. I mean, hey guys, go grab a burrito down at Olamandi's. Or hey, you know what? Go down to Hole in the Fence. We have our terms. We know our area. This is our community. Or where's Hole in the Fence? Well, Capitol Beach used to have a hole in the fence and you climb through to Doheny. And I don't know if you guys all remember that, but I've been here forever and I love this neighborhood. Let us share our community. I'm not opposed to us going to a vote. Regulate us. We've been regulated. In 10 years, I've never had a complaint. And it's us working together and being stewards of our neighborhood, stewards of our community. And so I ask that this be done collaboratively. And if the community says no, they said no, but let's make it genuine, honest, with the proper information. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Wilson.
See, I never knew there was a button that went down either. Wow, look at that. I'm always leaning up to the microphone. Okay. Good evening. Tonight I come as the president of the board of the Spinnaker Run Community Association with 136 units and over 200 eligible voters in Dana Point. Our association is in District 3, and there are at least 6 other HOAs that I know about in District 3, collectively representing around 2,300 eligible voters. There are over 50 HOAs in Dana Point. I can tell you from personal experience that STRs and HOAs, especially closely clustered units, are a nightmare for neighbors next door, for surrounding units, and also for others where guest and extra parking is very limited, especially right next to the beach as Spinnaker Run is. Beach locations often attract people who want to party, do drugs, and are not managed by owners living at that location or even nearby. And that's what we had at Spinnaker Run. It's hard to believe that after putting a referendum on the ballot and getting it approved in 2016, we are still seeing people of this council pushing for more STRs. Why do Dana Point citizens who own property and live here and vote here become second in line to out-of-town investors who just want to make money? This needs to change. It's your duty as council members to stand up for the residents of Dana Point, not out-of-town investors. I am not in favor of more STRs. If something has to change, it definitely needs to go before the voters. So in that regard, I favor Councilman Wyatt's proposal. Our community prohibits STRs, yet an appeals and that is our HOA community, let me be clear on that. Yet an appeals court has overthrown existing HOA regulations, siding with the Coastal Commission. Most HOAs in our area do not know this and the risk that it presents to their HOA communities. We have plenty of challenges dealing with the homeless, transients, and other criminals. We don't need the extra burden of dealing with come-and-go visitors when we work so hard to keep our residents safe and respectful of other residents. Last of all, it is simply unfair to really have one person cast a deciding vote about STRs, as would happen on the council currently, on behalf of 34,000 residents. This should be tabled for more thought and study. No way is it acceptable to let one person decide the fate of STRs in Dana Point. Please let us vote.
Thank you. Felicia Lernis, please. Followed by Chevy Atkinson, Carol Kelly, and Jeff Bossum.
Good evening. Hi, my name is excuse me. My name is Felicia Lerner. I'm a resident of Capistrano Beach. I'm going to read an excerpt of a letter that I wrote to our local newspaper. I'd like to share some of my experience for those residents of Dana Point who may not understand what it means to have an STR in their neighborhood. Like most, our home is our single most largest investment. We believed we were buying in a residential community and that the city would honor that designation. We were shocked to discover that the city council had unilaterally decided to allow commercial hotel-motel operation right next door with zero supervision. Unfortunately for us, we have STR houses on both sides of our property. The city allows new renters to check in and out as often as every 3 days. Adding to that, different cleaning crews arrive to clean each time with no regards for holidays, Saturdays, or Sundays. We have a zero lot line, and it's like living on a strip of poorly run hotels with no management on site. Renters have zero sense of community or belonging. I can hear every word that is being said on their patios, and they have little regards for our privacies. They are on vacation and have come to party, and this they do. You can imagine the impact of these nuances on our property value. I have visiting grandchildren who I try to get to bed at a reasonable time, and I have to get up and go to work in the mornings. Unfortunately, guests on both sides are often still outside at midnight, drinking and partying. Our quality of life has 100% been compromised due to the STRs. We would be better off renting full-time in a hotel where at least they would have resources to correct loud neighbors. I have no alternative but to call the police. I call and I write to the city constantly, and even if they do issue a violation, it's ineffective. There's a house on my street with 8 violations. Yet they continue to rent because the fines are low compared to the revenue coming in, and there's little consequences to leaving them unpaid. Everyone deserves a quiet enjoyment of their homes. The city of Dana Point has let their residents down. I'm imploring you as elected officials to please protect us and to protect us by not changing the zoning from residential to commercial. Thank you.
Thank you. Chevy Atkinson.
Hi, my name is Chevy Atkinson. I'm a resident of Dana Point. I want to thank Paul for putting what he put together. I think it does need to go to a vote of the public, and I think it's good that we understand the steps that are necessary. Real quick, I want to speak to the person with from the Spinnaker HOA. The ordinance 538 that we had allowed HOAs to prohibit short-term rentals. That's going to be very, very difficult this time around to get the Coastal Commission to agree to again. And it was an unfair, poor practice to have paid signature gatherers to come into our city and lie to our residents, and now we may not have that option. I do think people on both sides of this issue need to understand each other. I want to read a quick excerpt from a book called The Pocket of Paradise, A Story of Beach Road by Joe Dunn. And I quote, "My introduction to the Capistrano community known as Beach Road, it was Easter time, 1959. My wife Ellie and I had been married 2+ years. With one child in hand and another on the way, we were looking for a place to take an economical fall vacation. We welcome people from all over the world into our city. There's a lot of people here that are complaining about short-term rentals that potentially wouldn't have even discovered Dana Point if it wasn't for short-term rentals. There are vacation rentals in Dana Point 30 years before it became a city, half a decade or more before any of us moved here. And there's been short-term rentals in Dana Point for over 80 years. I do have some concerns. During the last meeting, I was very concerned, and I felt that what I was hearing were more enforcement issues than actual short-term rental issues. To the points about school shootings and all this other stuff, it's completely true. All of the concerns that residents have regarding noise. I mean, there's a home in my community. I have 4 kids that I know they're dealing drugs on the corner. They're out there every night at 2 in the morning if I ever come home late. When I walk my dog in the morning, the guy's high riding his skateboard through the street. That's not a short-term rental. And that's an enforcement issue. That's not a short-term rental issue. Concerns about corporations. Deborah brought up a good point. I don't want corporations buying up every home in my neighborhood either. But we asked Deborah, why didn't you come speak to us? There's plenty of cities that have examples of how they prevented corporations from buying up numerous houses in neighborhoods and turning the whole neighborhood into a hotel. If she would have asked us that, we could have given her examples of that. We want to work together with the city council. with people that have problems with short-term rentals. That poor lady, if she's got people that she's having to call at midnight and her grandkids can't go to bed, I 100% agree. That's an enforcement issue, and that needs to be dealt with by the city, and the rules need to be strict, and we don't want bad actors either, as far as people who are in favor of short-term rentals. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Carol Kelly?
I'll make my presentation short. My name is Carol Kelly, and I'm a resident and homeowner in Dana Point. The citizens of Dana Point have a right to know what goes on in our city, and that means we need to know where the short-term rentals are, the various things about short-term rentals. So I really support Paul's presentation on the agenda item, and I feel that we have a right to vote, the citizens, and I support having this ordinance go up for the vote of the people.
Thank you. Jeff Bossum. Followed by Elisa Hendry and Julian Joshua.
What I was going to say is already been said. Jeff Bossum.
All right, thank you. Elisa Hendry, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to.
Just state your city residence.
Alyssa Hendry, Dana Point. I just wanted to share the joy that it's been hosting people from all over the world. And also, my sister and I've talked about this during the referendum. My sister and I saved for our entire 20s to be able to afford a house. It's been our lifelong dream. We designed it. We spent 7 months renovating it. And now we're able to afford it through supplementing our mortgage with short-term rentals. We live there, but we also rent it out. And if short-term rentals were banned, we probably would lose our house. And our house is a small little beach bungalow, similar to a lot of the houses here in Dana Point. So it's not an option to just rent one room. It's only 700 square feet. So our only choice is to rent the whole thing. But beyond that, I just want to share the joy it's been. It's been one of the highlights of my life to host people from all over the world, to be able to share our enthusiasm for Dana Point, our beautiful house with them, our neighborhood with them. People, I just got a message from someone from Germany who wants to come back, stay at our house because they fell in love with Dana Point and they loved living as a resident, not in a corporate hotel. So, the argument that corporations are the owners of short-term rentals is just not true. I mean, the majority of us are hardworking Americans that just want to live out the American dream and have our house, but also be able to afford it. And so thank you guys, and please let us be a part of the planning moving forward.
Thank you. Julian Joshua.
Thank you very much. Julian Joshua, Dana Point. Now, let's be clear what we're talking about here, what the harm is that people are worried about. We're not talking about renting a room or your beach cottage to an old ladies knitting club for the weekend or to a family in need. What we're concerned with is party houses. Would you really think back to when you were at university, would you really like to live next to a frat house? You'd never get to sleep. Now, we've also noticed in HOAs that, which are, as things stand, unable to prevent sober living homes being set up if they have if 6 or fewer residents, that as they become less attractive economically, and this is happening, that the same speculators who are who bought up homes, vacant homes for cash to rent to a sober living home operation, are now in the market for buying up houses which they can then rent out on short-term rentals. The example we should really be following if we're worried about turning Dana Point into a sort of graveyard is Santa Monica. Nobody can deny that Santa Monica is a vibrant and living town, but they have recently their council has considered it necessary to adopt an ordinance which prohibits the purchase of homes, which prohibits the purchase of homes as second homes, and which for use as short-term rentals, and which also require hosting. That's the harm that they're looking for to prevent. So I think we certainly aren't trying to be spoilers, but we do want the city to be a livable city, and we don't want to turn it into a party town, but at the same time we want it to be vibrant and alive. So just look at the example of Santa Monica. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. That's our final speaker. Madam Clerk, do we have any additional speakers? Madam Clerk?
That's correct.
No additional speakers?
No.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public comment section, bring it back to council. Do I have a motion? Oop. Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt.
I will move the recommended action.
Thank you. To have a second. Ms. Lewis.
Yes, I will second.
Thank you. Okay, I'll bring it back to council for comment. Mr. Federico.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first, I would very much like to thank all of the speakers who spoke on both sides of this issue tonight. We understand, I think all of us understand that this is a complex issue for a lot of reasons. There are ideas on both sides of it. There's a lot of land use and law that goes into it. And then there's the California Coastal Commission. There are a few things that I want to address sort of directly. I heard comments, some comments that the policy is something that the voters or that the residents will be stuck with. And how can the council want more short-term rentals? We don't have a draft ordinance. I've never said I want more short-term rentals. And we don't know what the policy would be. We don't have a draft policy. The only thing that I've seen has been a draft that hasn't been voted on by the council, that was put together by the subcommittee, that essentially eliminates short-term rentals, because I think there are about 4 homestay, home share short-term rentals in our town right now that are permitted. So that thing essentially eliminates short-term rentals. But no one's asked the rest of the council what we think this next policy should be going forward. I have a few more comments, but Santa Monica is a scary example. In addition to the comments that the speaker made, you also can't rent your home long-term to someone in Santa Monica if they're not willing to become a full-time resident there. Rent controls are probably on the horizon for Santa Monica. There are lots and lots of restrictions. It's a terrible example. And I need to caution all of us about other examples. We've heard a lot of examples in the past about cities who've banned short-term rentals and put lots of restrictions in place. I've been studying this a lot, and for every example for that, there's a city who has come up with a reasonable short-term rental policy that the majority of residents can be happy with strict enforcement, caps on the total number of short-term rental permits that are allowed, and then any future caps on the number of permits that any one individual can have. There's lots of ways to mitigate the concerns that we have for these short-term rentals. Anyway, I am not opposed to having this go to a ballot measure. My concern right now is I don't know what we would be sending to the ballot, because we have not done the work to create a ballot measure, to create a draft ordinance. Now, on one hand, a ballot measure would be helpful in that we've been working on this for far too long. It's been 6 years and counting, and we're no closer to a good ordinance than we were certainly when I got here, and I would argue since 2016. This issue's also been politicized an awful lot, and it's something we need to take the politics out of in order to get a good solution. And there were sufficient signatures to stop the last ordinance. I think it's false assumption that that last ordinance is the same that's going to go forward. I wouldn't support that ordinance going forward. So to assume that we have to use those signatures on a new ordinance is kind of a false assumption in my mind. The challenge with sending an ordinance to a ballot measure is that it's got to be perfect. Because as we've seen with the town center plan, if there are any errors in it, it becomes very, very difficult to change it. Let's say that we cap the total number of short-term rental permits, pick a random number. This is a number we would never use, but hypothetically 40,000. I use that number because there's way more than homes that we even have in Dana Point. Let's say we wanted to reduce that number to 30,000. We could never do it without going back to the voters. So we have to be very careful. If we're going to send this to the voters, it's got to be perfect, and we've got a lot of work to do. I don't think we're anywhere close to being able to have that on a November 2020 ballot. I tried a number of meetings ago to set a policy objective to get us closer, and I'm willing to do that again tonight. I would say I would support a ballot, short-term rental ordinance that caps the number of short-term rental permits that are non-homestay at the current number of 153, and include all the other necessary nuisance controls that we need. And going forward, anytime someone loses a permit because they were a nuisance under our stiffer laws, we would make sure that that permit goes to a primary residence, or we prioritize local ownership to discourage or eliminate outside ownership. But we need to talk about policy, I think, way before we talk about process on something like this. So while I'm not opposed to sending this to the voters, I'd like to hear from my council members what they actually think this policy ought to look like. And if we agree 5-0 on this issue, do we really still need to send that to the voters? That would be the question that I would ask my colleagues. Okay.
Do you have any other members of the council who'd like to speak? Ms. Lewis.
Thank you. Well, I think in part, Mr. Federico has made my argument why this needs to go to a vote of the people. It is complicated. And first, I'd like to say I appreciate everybody being here, give us our sentiment, but the motion and what we're talking about is not an ordinance itself. It's a ballot measure on the ordinance is approved by a simple majority of the Dana Point voters. So what we're talking about tonight is no matter how this gets approved, 5-0, 3-2, 4-1, the question that we're dealing with here tonight as a council is, do we want to let our voters make the final decision once we have approved an ordinance and Coastal Commission has approved it? And that's what we need to focus on. In terms of Mr. Federico's concern about the ordinance, well, we have a process. The process is in 2018, this council voted unanimously to put a subcommittee together of 2 council members to work on a short-term rental ordinance. At the time, 2 members were approved. They were approved unanimously, Mr. Tomlinson and Mr. Wyatt. For the past, I don't know, since Mr. Tomlinson is no longer on the council, I think 5-6 months ago, there was another unanimous vote to put me on the subcommittee. But it's not our ordinance, it's the subcommittee, just as the parking subcommittee wasn't Joe Muller's, decisions. It was a task force that he sat on, did the work, and brought back to the council. So we're not going to vote. We're not sending a ballot measure that hasn't already been approved by the council. But you have to let the council go through the process that the 5 of us have already agreed is the process. So I am in favor and strongly support sending any ordinance to a vote of the people, and let me tell you why. First of all, I see this very analogous to an HOA trying to change its CC&Rs. The city has made an agreement with its residents through its zoning code. And everybody has relied on that zoning code, and everybody buys and rents and lives under this code that we have made. If we are going to change this code, which is going to, as many people noted, affect the single most expensive investment we will make in our lives, not to mention it's our homes, then I feel that every one of us should get to weigh in on that. This really should be a decision of the city. Much like if you're going to change your HOA, CC&Rs, it shouldn't be a vote, and it isn't a vote of 2, 3, 4 people on a board. It is a decision of the people who live there. The other thing is, as another speaker noted, districting. Districting completely changed the dynamics of this government. In 2020, if I represent the Lantern Village, I will represent 1/5 of the city. That's it. My decisions I can only be accountable for my decisions to those people. And all of us up here will be that way. So there might be, if this is a 3-2 vote, there will be 3 people representing 3 districts only. 2 districts may completely disagree with that decision and have no input and no remedy because they don't have the ability to vote for the 3 people who made the decision, and they don't have the ability to put pressure on that person to listen to them because they don't have the ability to recall that person. So I feel, in fairness, this needs to go to a vote of the residents before anything of this magnitude takes this effect. I do want to address Mr. Akins when he, sorry? Sorry. That's okay. Mr. Atkinson, I did talk to short-term renters. In fact, we talked for probably over an hour when I was running for election when we sat at RJ's. I have listened to many people who are proponents of short-term rentals, and I respect your opinions and I listen to them, not just here tonight, but every time we have had this issue come up since 2015, 2016, when I've been involved in the city and gone to community centers and all the other places. So I've listened, I understand your position. I understand the position of the proponents. I read your Facebook.
No, thank you. Hey, excuse me. We're in the middle of a meeting right now. Please,
okay, so I just wanted you to know, I do pay attention.
Hey, please, excuse me. We're in the middle of a meeting right now. Thank you.
I do pay attention. I do listen to all sides. I'm not just back in some back room going, okay, how do we make sure these things never come to our city, But getting back to my point, this is to decide whether or not to send it to a ballot measure on the ordinance. In terms of Santa Monica, I think the speaker was talking just about Santa Monica's short-term rental policy, not turning Dana Point into all of Santa Monica and, rent control and all the other issues. And there are many ordinances, short-term rental ordinance, which is part of what the subcommittee does, is we look at the various ordinances and, see what can be gained and talk to those cities to see what their issues are and how has their ordinance worked for them and how would they change their ordinance. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scene there. So I will just finish up by saying that I think it's important because this is an issue that is not going to go away until we resolve it in a way that everyone feels is fair, that they have had their say, whether they win or lose. We need to make sure that, unlike 2016, when people felt they were left out of the decision and so went to the extraordinary remedy of a ballot initiative, or actually, I guess it was a referendum, which is an extraordinary remedy, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of work, and a lot of money. We want people to feel that they have been heard, that the process has been fair, and that whoever carries the day, we can all agree that it was a good process and that we can get behind whatever happened. And if it has to be changed, I think the point is that it should be difficult to be changed. This is this is something that is fundamental to our livability and the livability of the city and our quality of life. And I think it is something that we should have to, once again, bring it back to people and ask them, here's been our experience. This is the problem we're facing. Here's how we would like to change it, and let people vote again on it. And, if it's a good change, if it's something residents support, it will pass. If it's something that only 3 people up here support and the residents don't, it won't pass. And I think that's the important point. So in closing, yes, I'm voting yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt.
So I'll sort of respond on some of the issues and how we got here. First of all, in terms of the difficulty to change, I mean, one of the things that we're up against, I think, and you'll recall in 2016, the Coastal Commission came back with some changes that they required for them to accept the ordinance that was on the books by the city at that time, waiting on their approval. And I will say that, as I recall correctly, both members of the council here who voted on that voted no, that they could not accept the fact that the Coastal Commission had ownership of the rules because of the difficulty of ever changing it in the future. And that concern's well-founded. The situation we're in, however, and why we're trying to find the commonality between that, the Coastal Commission has made it clear to the city and in every jurisdiction in the coastal that that banning short-term rentals completely is simply, in their view, not an option. And while they can't come and pass an ordinance, they have lots of ways to make sure that if we simply don't work on the issue and try to find a good answer, they will find some way to come back and put us in a bind. So obviously we work with the Coastal Commission all the time and want to have as good a working relationship with them as possible. So we're very sensitive to the fact that they feel this is important to help serve the coast, and which is their responsibility. So we've spent the bulk of the last year and a half, when we started off with the short-term subcommittee, trying to figure out exactly where they stand. And they're very it's a relatively slow turnaround process to work with them. They have a lot of things that come before them, and so they have to schedule it and work through the staff. So it's taken a lot of time. And basically, the draft ordinance that we reviewed here that created a lot of, wasn't a draft ordinance that we were ready to bring to council. There was a meeting that took place with coastal staff, and we got some feedback. And basically, they said, if you want to get any more precise feedback from us, you have to send us an ordinance to review. So we took what they said and we wrote it into an ordinance, and we sent it to them to see if they would in fact look at what they said that they would work with and say yes or no, that that's what they meant and that's what we would work with. So that was the purpose for that. So it is a piece of data that we needed to get. Similarly, the reason we're trying to go to the voters, and I think it's critical here, is we need to also understand what works for them. If an ordinance is passed, whether or not we decide it should go to the voters, I'm not sure we will ultimately be in charge of that, but we should step up and do our I think, do our part of insisting that that's the correct way to do it. But basically, there will be a lot of statements and variety of selling it and selling the fear of it, and and so forth. There will be a lot of back and forth, a lot of noise, if you will, from people who are concerned about it and feel like they they need to weigh in and get some. So ultimately, we need to find out in a less in a more controlled environment. We need to get some input. When we worked our tails off to get input from coastal. We need to work just as hard to get input from the people who live here, all the people who live here, right? We've talked to a lot of owners. They don't sound any different than what the people here. They try to run good, or they try to run good STRs. I haven't talked to any owners who came to say it's my intent to run an awful place, right? They all really want to run good places, and they work hard at it. And we talked to a lot of neighbors, and basically we get a lot of neighbors who say, it's really not really very desirable, right? But ultimately, at this moment in time, 80% or more of our residents haven't weighed in at all. So we have to bring it up to where we get their buy-in. They're the ones who ultimately will need to understand what the implications of this are on both sides. We've had people who are saying it is terrific to live next to them because we get a lot of good people. Well, if that's the experience, and basically when we talk to enough residents, that by end we should find out. A lot of people say, look, it's quieter to live next to them than it is any other, whether you rent or own, you can have parties next door. So that's not the issue. We need to find out whether, in fact, most people go, I'm not really that concerned. And we know people who go, it's just awful, right? So somewhere in there, we need to look at alternatives that we can present out and get people to tell us, is that alternative accepted? And we need to be really clear that we're going across all the board of what the alternatives are, from, little regulation to, very restrict regulation, so that people can give us input. So having said that, I worry that the amount of time it's taken us to get input from coastal and work through it is much longer than I would have hoped. And I want to put a little bit of, heat under us, if you will, to try to finish up and get things done. It could be that we won't be able to make it November 2020, and I would find that to be unfortunate if it gets pushed to, if we decide we have to go to voters and it gets pushed to March 2022. That's a long way away, and so I'd like not to have that happen. But on the other hand, we have to do it right, because it won't be easily changeable. And to respond to Mr. Federico, it will be even more difficult to change it through coastal than it will through our voters. So it doesn't matter what happens here, it will not be easy to change. So therefore, we really need to do it. Coming back to, sort of the overall reason to go to the voters at the broadest sense, anytime you do a zoning change, which is what this is, right? Ultimately, we're changing what can be done within a zone of our city. There will be people who will say that zoning change will benefit us, and there will be people who say that zoning change will harm us. And it could be that, the number on either side, one way or the other, is small. In other words, there are zoning changes where the harm is is minimal or inconsequential, so it's easy to sell. There are ones where it is more difficult to sell. But ultimately, to do any zoning change, you try to reach all of the impacted people and work through how the benefit outweighs the harm, or how to mitigate the harm that's done, if there's, and what the right answer, so that you can come to an agreement and get a majority of the people who are impacted to agree with you. This zoning change likely will affect virtually every residential neighborhood in the city, all parts of the zoning. So going and meeting with every resident of the city, which would be the perfect solution, and getting input and discussing with them is not likely. But the best alternative to that is put it on the vote and ask them. So at least they get to say, this is my input to this zoning change. And that's really the reason why I ultimately believe that that's what we could do, because that's the only way we're going to get input from the majority of the people who are affected by it, is put it on the ballot so that they can weigh in, because we can't meet with every part of the city, and this affects every part of the city. So that's the reason why I really strongly think we need to do that. There's lots of other arguments about what the ordinance should have in it or not. I'm not prepared to argue what the ordinance should contain. We got direction from council that we agreed on to give to the subcommittee to help us do the ordinance. I found that perfectly helpful and acceptable. I don't have any disagreement with that as we work through it. When it comes back to council, we have to pass it, which basically means we need a bunch of public meetings here to work through and get additional public weigh-in and forums like this. And by the way, I want to thank everybody who came and spoke on both sides of it. I couldn't appreciate more getting input, because we worked a long time on this, and every piece of input is a positive to us to give us more information than we had before. And it has to come back. Having said that, when you start to count down the days between November and the fact that we hold 2 council meetings a year and we really won't see anything before February, we're short on time. So I want to encourage us to calendar out all the work that has to be done, and do what we can to meet the dates, and try to be sensitive that getting an answer to people sooner or later is important. And in addition to that, I probably get, an email or 2 a week telling me that, I want a short-term rental there, and I want to know when you're going to get your act together and have an ordinance so I can have a short-term rental, or I got a short-term rental next to me and I want to know when you get act together and close it down because I don't like it there, or whatever. We haven't given anybody any timetable, and nobody, when we started this, including myself, looked at it and said, I think I'm going to spend the next 3 years doing this. Right? But ultimately, we're dealing with various government agencies that all get to weigh in on it, and it's a time-consuming process. So, having said that, I think that what I put here tonight wasn't to tell you what the ordinance should contain. However, I am thankful that we did get people who weighed in and thought, and actually there are a few good ideas that came out of it that I think are worth jotting down and considering when we work through it. What I wanted to do was agree so that we had transparent communication to everybody who was affected by this of how we were going to get there from here and what their role is. So if their role isn't to get the vote on it, I think we need to make it clear that we do not intend to make that happen. And if they're concerned about that, then they need to find a way to decide what their reaction to that is. If we say here that we do want to vote on it, then I think we can communicate to our residents that that's the way it's going to happen. And they will not only get to weigh in at any council meetings, but they will get the final say on the vote. So what I wanted to do was communicate and agree on effectively how we were going to get there from here. And so I made that recommendation. So that's my input about my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions. Mr. Denny, based on your experience working in city and county government and interacting with the Coastal Commission, if we were to pass an ordinance tonight, do you have any opinion on what the chances of them getting back to us in time to get this on the 2020 ballot would be?
Not likely.
Okay. And my follow-up question is, do you have any estimate of what the cost in terms of time and money would be to putting this on the ballot?
When we inquired of the Registrar of Voters to consider putting a measure on the March ballot, I think the final number we got was in the range of about $46,000. Is that right? Or I'm looking at Kathy Ward,
Are
sorry.
we talking about March? Or are we talking about November?
What was the quote we got from March?
For March, they brought it down to 64,000.
Excuse me. It started at 86 and I think went down to
And-
64. I got my numbers mixed up. Sorry about that, sir.
Yeah. Do you have a follow-up, Ms. Ward, to that?
They also gave me a number for November,
What was that?
and that was 53,000, something like that.
And so I'll address this next one to you. Maybe they didn't give you, did they give you any number for if it were a special election rather than a scheduled election?
No, I never asked for it, but as I say, that was the two numbers I received.
Is it generally more or less to do a special election?
Generally, it's more because you don't have any other processes going on at that time.
Okay. Well, I've looked at the recommended action and the supporting, I've listened to the supporting arguments and what everyone has had to say. So I'll just start up front by saying, I disagree with this approach to this issue as it's been outlined here. My perspective on this is that the people already have a right to vote on this. And I think from what I'm hearing from most of the people that are asking that this be put to a vote, they understand that too. If we go through the history, which I think most of you know, and it's been alluded to here tonight, we're here today because back in 2013, a short-term rental ordinance was passed. It went to the Coastal Commission. We waited to hear whether they were going to approve it or not. In 2016, they came back with some changes, as Mayor Pro Tem White alluded to, that were not acceptable to me and Mayor Miller at the time. So when the vote came up to vote on that ordinance, it passed 3-2 with Mayor Miller and myself voting no. The response to that was, as has been brought up here, a referendum. And so what that meant was, if the people of the community didn't like what the council had done, they had the ability to force it to a vote. But let me make that even clearer. They had the ability to make the city council consider whether putting it to a vote or simply rescinding the ordinance, basically meaning there's not going to be a vote. They've won the election. That's even better for the people who brought the referendum, in that they got what they wanted. The ordinance was rescinded. They didn't even risk having it go to an election at that point. So that's the way our system is set up. In California, we specifically allow the people that opportunity to either bring ballot measures affirmatively or bring referendums if they don't like what the city council has done. I view this very similar. I think Councilmember Federico alluded to it. We don't know what the ordinance is. We don't know if we were to pass something and if the Coastal Commission agreed to it, if anyone would object to it. We're trying to work towards that to make sure we can work with the Coastal Commission, bring everyone together so that we can come up with an ordinance that is acceptable to everyone, so that it's not sent to a vote of the people to basically say, do you ratify what we're doing? in a sense, the way I see this, it's a preemptive referendum. It's basically saying, we're going to do this. If the Coastal Commission approves it, well, we're not even going to wait for a referendum. We're just going to go ahead and send it to a vote of the people. I don't think that's the way the system was meant to be, the way it's set up, and it doesn't prohibit the people from weighing in as they have done. So, for those reasons, I considering the fact that I don't think, again, as has been brought up, we're not really close to sending up an ordinance for the Coastal Commission to vote on. And even if they did accept whatever we sent, I mean, it's not going to be ready for the 2020 election. There's a cost in time and money. And I just don't think this is the right approach to solving this issue. So for those reasons, I'm not going to support the motion tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ms. Lewis.
Thank you. So I would like to address some of the comments from Mr. Vizora. I'm a bit troubled. We had the chamber come to us and say, hey, we want to change Measure H, and the council didn't tell them, hey, that's your problem. This is the way things work here. If you want it to go to measure, you put something together. This is our system. We were all about, okay, well, what's your issue? How much is it going to cost? Is this something we should do? And I'm troubled that when residents come to us and say, well, we want a vote, we want a voice. Our voice has been taken away from us for 4 out of 5 of us. Now it's, well, here's our system. If you want to have a voice and put it on the ballot, we have a process. Go spend money and your time and get another referendum going, rather than us say, okay, this is a big change. We put our residents first. We see them as our primary customer here, and we want them to feel as though they have a say in our major decision, and therefore we want you to feel comfortable with the final outcome. I feel that whatever we spend, 60, 70, 80, I mean, we spend a lot of money up here on stuff. Nothing, in my opinion, is as important as this issue, and whatever we need to spend to make residents feel that the process has been fair is money well spent. And I do wonder how you feel people have a vote at this point when districting has taken away their ability to vote for 4 of 5 of us. And as I said, if 3 pass this, there are going to be 2 districts that were not represented and do not have a voice and do not have a vote and don't even have a vote after the fact because they can't put together a recall. They don't live in the district. So I would take exception. And I do have to say that my feeling is no matter what happens, this is going on the ballot. So why don't we just all agree this is going on the ballot? Let's make this a cooperative process, not another HI or STR, no STR, and yet another item that's going to divide us. This is our chance to bring us all together. And I heard a lot of people who are for STR say, yes, put it on the ballot. So this is our opportunity to all come together as a city and say, this is our process, as Paul said. This is to tell people what the process is. And if we're not going to do a vote of the ballot, we owe it to people to let them know now. But I see this as our opportunity to have a consensus here and bring people in there and say, you know what, we are one city. We all want to have a voice on this very important issue. We're your representatives, and let's all come together and do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt.
Yeah, so to respond back to my colleague, council member Victoric's process, I agree that if we don't put it on the ballot, they always have the option of a referendum to put it on the ballot if they want to do that. I think, actually, my guess is that if we don't put it on the ballot, that will happen. I think that would be unfortunate to go through that. I think our process is not quite as rigid as you made it sound. This happens to be one of those ordinance that doesn't affect a small group within our city or, particular. This affects almost everyone. When you have that broad of an impact on it, then you need to ask those people impacted, and that's everyone. So this is not one where we should say, well, we will tell you what we think is right, and if you don't like it, you can do a referendum. This is one where we need our residents to agree with us on it, that we've got it right, and take it to them and allow their voice to be heard.
Thank you. Okay. So I've heard a lot tonight, and this is going down the path exactly where I thought it was going to go. It was presented out here that by certain groups and back in 2016, well, tonight it was presented that there's a majority on this council that's just going to drive this thing forward. And it's brought up, and I appreciate Mayor Pro Tem White and Councilmember Vic Sork bringing it up. Back in 2016, when we voted on this, he and I were the sole voices against it because this is such a complex issue. We did not want Coastal to have control of it. Whatever we do in the next few months or years, whatever it turns out to be, is something that in 3 or 4 years, the demand could change dramatically on what this community wants out of short-term rentals. And we need to make it as easy as possible for the community to shift directions. That's what this is all about. This referendum, we heard it tonight, this is getting very political, and it started in this chamber with the comment section. That is not what this should be. We heard that there was dark money brought up again. Well, let's not forget that group took $27,000 from the biggest developer in town. But when it was benefiting them, that was okay. So let's get the politics out of this. I mean, that's where this is going. This feels like people are trying to create campaign issues out of it. That should not be anywhere near this issue. Okay? We had a survey. We had an election. And in the election, when we went to districts, it was very controversial. Nobody liked it, least of all, at least 2 of the members. I think 4 of the members up here, Mr. Federico wasn't here when that decision was made. Nobody liked that. But the reality is this. You are elected by your district. And people are talking about, and we heard it out here, let the people vote. So whatever will be, however it comes down, it'll come down. I don't believe that's the case, because if you believe that, you wouldn't be talking about recalls, right? You would allow the election to take its place. And if you don't like what happened, work towards the next election and don't talk about recall. So this is already political in here. And when we went to districts, I represent a district now. I'm not citywide. My job now, by law, and you can thank your friends up in Sacramento for passing these laws that we have to follow.
My friend?
Well,
Wow, I didn't know it was so powerful.
So anyway, they pass those laws. We have to follow it. So I have to represent my district. If I make a vote in my district that they don't like, that's fine. They can make sure I don't get reelected, or they can recall me. That's an option. But don't ever think that because we're in districts that because we make a vote one way, that we're not taking into consideration the rest of the city. We are, but we have to represent our district. So if 2/3 of the districts in this city agree with the 3 votes that happen up here, that's the majority of the city. Okay, it's a simple majority. And so you have to worry about that. I don't like where this is going. I don't like, this idea that if we have to make this decision now, we have nothing in front of us to vote on. Nothing. We were elected to make these decisions. I feel like it's to a certain degree shirking our responsibility every time we have something come up that we have to put it on a ballot. You talked about zoning. This is a zoning change. Nobody's ever asked me to put another zoning change on the ballot. We make them all the time. We're talking about Doheny Village right now. Is that something that's a big zoning change? Should that be on the ballot? So, I'm looking at this and I want to respond to Councilmember Lewis, her Measure H reference. The chamber brought it to us because they know it has to go on the ballot. By law, any change to that has to go on the ballot. And, making that comparison to this issue and that issue is very different. I'm not really, first of all, I'm not saying if I would or wouldn't put this on the ballot, but the reality is I have nothing to put on. And I'm not going to make a commitment to do something when I don't even know what I'm being asked to do. I haven't seen the ordinance. We're nowhere near it. When I made the decision in 2016 to vote against that ordinance, I listened to the community. I listened to Capital Cares. I listened to Save Dana Point, and I agreed with them. We need to have stricter regulation around these. I mean, I don't want to ban them because the Coastal Commission is not going to allow that, but we have to have more regulation around it. We need to have stricter enforcement. We need to talk about length of stay. We need to talk about numbers in the city. There's a lot there, and I agreed with them. They came up, and I remember specifically Ms. Hill gave us a letter from Save Dana Point laying out some issues that they had, and I agreed with them. And I said, we need to take this forward. This is something I don't know if we need to put it on a ballot or not, but we absolutely need to get this. We need to get out in front of the people and listen to what they're saying. We need to have an ordinance that works for everybody. Okay, I appreciate everybody that came here tonight. I appreciate the group that are pro short-term rentals and that they want it on a ballot. That's great. But the reality is we don't have anything to put on it. I'm not ever going to commit myself to put something on a ballot that I don't even know what it is. And I don't think any one of us should be doing that. So, we could go down this path and say, we think we have it, and Coastal Commission can say no. But I'm going to be very clear. My position hasn't changed since 2016. If it goes into the LCP, I'm voting no on it because I'm not going to give up control of an ordinance in Dana Point to the Coastal Commission. So whatever comes out of this, it's got to be in our business regs so this community can make changes as they see fit. And with that, Ms. Lewis.
Thank you. I just want it to be clear that we're just committing to putting whatever is passed on the ballot. So you have the right as the council member to first vote on the ordinance. Nothing is going on the ballot until it is approved by this council. So all we're saying is, here is the process. The process is the subcommittee work on an ordinance, we bring an ordinance here. That ordinance at some point gets approved by this council and the Coastal Commission. So if you don't feel comfortable putting whatever ordinance is brought to you on the ballot, you're voting no, and it's not going to the ballot. So it's not until we get a ordinance that is approved by this council, that's what's going to the ballot. We're not arguing about what's going to the ballot at this point. At this point, we're simply saying, here's the process. We do our survey, we pass a short-term rental ordinance, it gets passed by the Coastal Commission, and then whatever those two bodies have agreed to and pass, then that goes to a vote of the people. That's our process. Once all that happens, then our ordinance takes effect. So you're not committing to anything at this point other than the process.
Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt. So to follow up, and Councilmember Lewis brought part of this up, but basically the Coastal Commission was very clear with us in the last go around that ultimately they can weigh in, they can give us input, et cetera, but they will take, when we pass, as a city, pass an ordinance, and then once passed by the council, they want to be able to weigh in and say yay or nay. I mean, or, yay with changes or whatever, just as they did before. Now, one of the considerations that came up when we started the short-term rental was to essentially a discussion about doing what we did in 2013 was, well, why don't we put together an ordinance and we'll enact it and we will, let it take effect. And if coastal comes back in the next whatever time period, in the case of 2013, they didn't come back until 2016. So they were 2 years plus after it went into effect before they responded. And then if they don't like it, then we'll rescind it again. We'll decide what to do. We created a lot of issues by trying to be more expedient the first time and get it out there and follow that process. We, as a subcommittee, decided not to do that we did not want it to take effect until they had approved it, because it creates, this thing about how you backtrack, and how you put out. I read through the paragraph in there that said, you're doing this at your own risk. I mean, that's not really a very comfortable way for anybody to work. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't do that. But ultimately, and you're saying, I don't want to, go to the people until I know what I voted on. Well, here we're committing to go to coastal after we vote on it. It didn't seem a big step to say, and by the way, we also need to go to our voters because they're all impacted by a lot more than coastal is impacted by it, actually. So putting it out there, again, it comes to us. We will debate it in this council until we agree that we can get 3 votes to or more on an ordinance, and then it has to go through the rest of the process. So this is simply a method I think is fair to the people who live and actually run short-term rentals too in the city, to say this is in fact how this is going to happen and how it needs to play out in order that when we finally get it to the ballot and get it passed, that we, the timing, and you can see the process, and the steps that have to happen. And so I just think it's a fair way. And the idea that because we haven't yet agreed on what the ordinance is, that we shouldn't make a decision on how it should get passed doesn't follow, in my view. I think we can commit to the fact that we're going to have a number of open dialogues here to try to get an ordinance that we believe that our voters will accept, as well as the Coastal Commission, but ultimately to let our residents know that ultimately they will get the last word on it.
Mr. Federico.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of the comments earlier brought up some sort of questions in my mind. Ms. Lewis, you mentioned CC&Rs and HOAs. I understand the analogy you're drawing, except when someone moves into an HOA, they sign the CC&Rs. Those CC&Rs were created when the HOA was, and says, here's what the rules will be for how you vote on things, how you might change your rules. It's basically their own, governing laws. When we move into our town, we accept the laws of our state that say, here's a referendum process, here's certain things tax changes have to go to ballot measures. So I guess I'm not debating the issue, but I do have a question for our city attorney. Mr. City Attorney, what are there any legal implications of this this motion I guess we have on the table? You know, can we even legally do this? How does this play out? And what might we not be considering legally, if anything?
What you are doing tonight is, if you were to go forward with this motion and adopt it, it's non-binding. It's just sort of a statement of policy. There's a whole process you have to go through to put something on the ballot. And the converse is also true. If you were not to go forward with this motion tonight, there'd be nothing that would prevent you from putting something on the ballot. The important legal issue is when the time comes to consider putting something on the ballot, you have to follow the process that exists in the election code for putting it on the ballot. You can't do that tonight, so you can't legally bind yourself tonight one way or the other. It's not that different than adopting a council policy. This is something we endeavor to do, but if you don't, there's no legal consequences for not doing it.
I had more comments. I'll say again, I'm not opposed to this going to the ballot, but we have nothing in front of us to say that we're sending to a ballot. And I understand that, Paul, I understand and appreciate all the hard work you put into this, but we've already got one council. We've got not a unanimous vote even on the policy objectives that I tried to lay out for this. So my concern is, for me, is that one council member has already disagreed with the policy objectives that I think are the correct basis for foundation for the ordinance that should go forward. For me, all it would take would be two other council members to come up with a policy that I might think is outrageous. And now if I'm voting tonight to send that to the ballot, how do I come back from that? And so I think I would like to make a substitute motion, Mr. Mayor, that we continue this until we have an ordinance, a draft ordinance to vote on and consider.
Thank you, Mr. Federico. I'm going to let that hang. I'll actually second it for discussion, and we'll take it, Ms. Lewis.
Well, okay, this is news about the non-binding, and it would have really been nice to have heard this, an hour and a half ago, or even when this was put on. But if we, 3 people or more, agree that we're going to go through all these processes, not that, okay, we're just going to put on the ballot and then there's some process we have to go to. What we're agreeing to, if 3 or more people agree, is that we are going to take whatever steps are necessary to get it on the ballot. So I don't envision, if we agree that it's going to the ballot, that at some point in the future, it's like, oh, did we say it's going to the ballot? No, we're not going to the ballot. Or that, okay, there's steps that have to be taken, that somehow that takes another vote. To me, that is part and parcel of what we're voting on. If it's going to the ballot, we are agreeing that we're going to do whatever is necessary to get it there. So are you saying we're not able to do that? We're not able to, 3 people say whatever is necessary to put it on the ballot and let residents vote. The ultimate ordinance that we vote on and that pass and the Coastal Commission agrees to, that if we say tonight that's going to the ballot, there's no way to make that a binding decision?
That's correct.
Well, what is it we do up here?
Well, I didn't put it on the agenda. I'm just answering the questions presented to me. You guys come up with a policy idea.
It's not a policy.
It is. This is a policy question.
This is a decision of the council. So all decisions of the council are policies? Is that what I hear?
There is a law that explains very clearly how something goes on the ballot.
Yes.
You have to have for the council to put something on the ballot, you have to have the question in front of you, the exact the exact issue that's going to the ballot is what you have to vote on to send to the ballot. If it comes from a petition from the people, then the exact question that they have presented is exactly what has to go on the ballot. You don't have the ability to take a vote tonight to put something on the ballot that you don't have in front of you. You can pledge you're going to do it, but it's non-binding. That was the question that was asked to me. Is there any legal ramifications? And the answer is no. This is policy. This is you deciding that you want to commit to do this, but if you choose not to, then you don't have to. There's no ramification. That was the question asked to me. That's the answer.
So if we pass something and we have already agreed as a council that whatever it is we pass is going on the ballot, we have to vote again. That's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. You would have to vote to put something on the ballot at some point in time.
And we couldn't agree that we are going to do that. We have to vote again.
You can agree to do it, but if you don't do it, there is no legal ramification. That was the question that was asked.
Okay, like I said, it would have been really nice to know a long time ago.
Ask the question.
Mr. White.
Done yet. Honestly, I would hope that that advice would be given to us when we're sitting here, debating something. Somebody say, "Oh, by the way, do you realize it's not binding?" Because it would have made the discussion a whole nother discussion. So I'm miffed that I wasn't told that.
Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt.
Well,
Oh, hold on. I'm sorry. Hit your button again. I turned you off by mistake. There you are. Okay, got it.
Okay, I appreciate the concern and understanding that. And so sort of in defense of our city attorney and comments here, I understood that coming in, right? That there's a process to go through to get something on the ballot. Eventually, what this is not to vote to put that exact language on the ballot. We will obviously have to do that when the time comes. That's part of the process of getting it on the ballot when the time comes. This is a process that the council, by adopting, is making a commitment to our residents on the process we will follow and what our steps were to get it on there. And we'll work through all the details of every one of these when the details come. And I also understand that it's a council policy, right? And we could come back next week and we could decide to change the policy and it would be changed, right? So, but I do think it's, having said that, if we commit to do something and we decide that we want to uncommit, at least you have to come back and uncommit publicly. You can't just ignore it generally. So I think we're following through on that. And if it does so I think it's fair to say what we're doing is making a council, commitment of saying this is the steps that we will go through as a council. We're committing to you to go through these to pass the short-term rental ordinance, and we will absolutely agree that we're going to give you a chance to weigh in here. It's true, we could renege on anything we say, right? And come back and vote against it. And I would expect that our residents would be at the podium there, holding up what we voted for tonight and saying, you made a commitment to us, a clear commitment to us. And what did you do? Lie in our face because you didn't intend it? I mean, that's the kind of conversation we ought to be having in that time. So I think that if as a council, we believe these are the appropriate steps to take, and we want to make a commitment to our residents that we will take the steps, then we can vote on this recommended action. If we're unwilling to commit to our residents that we will take these steps, then we should say we're unwilling to make that commitment. And that's kind of where we are. So.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt. This was covered briefly, but I'm just going to hit a couple points. The referendum, the assumption that if we pass an ordinance that it's automatic going to referendum if we don't put it on the ballot, I don't completely buy into that. I think if we do our job and include the community in what we're trying to accomplish, we will come up with a good ordinance that people aren't going to say you have to put that on a ballot for the vote. That's our job. And committing it to going to the Coastal Commission, we're not committing that. That's required by us. We can't pass anything in the coastal zone without the Coastal Commission approval. That is not us committing to do it. We're required by law. And the process does exist. And I think Mr. Federico hit that at the end. If you don't like what's going on, you can do a ballot measure, you can pass a referendum. The process exists. We're following the process. This seems like we're trying to circumvent it. And I wasn't aware of what Mr. Munoz was saying, but I truly don't believe that we should be voting on anything to go on the ballot until we know what we're voting on. This goes right back to what I was saying at the beginning. This is being done for political reasons. It's inappropriate. You're at the dais. It can be construed as campaigning. It's inappropriate. And if you go to the FPPC, it could be considered illegal. That's where this is. You're trying to make us commit to something that we don't even know what we're committing to. So I'm not comfortable with that. I actually absolutely support Mr. Federico's motion. I'll be voting yes on it. It's exactly where we should be. If we want to actually have that discussion after we have an ordinance in front of us that we think this community can live with, and again, if it has anything to do with going into our LCP, I'm not going to vote on it anyway. You know, by all means, we'll have that discussion then, but this is very premature. Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt.
Well, I will disagree with your statement, and you're probably not too surprised by that. I wrote this recommendation, and I wrote this staff report about it and why. I didn't write it for any political reasons, and I basically wrote it because the question comes up of when are we going to do something? How are we going to do it? Why don't we have it done yet? Where's our chance to weigh in? I mean, all those variety of the concerns about how are we going to get there? And I felt two things caused me to write this. First of all, I felt that we needed to decide among ourselves what we agreed should happen to put a short-term rental ordinance into effect. And that's the conversation we're having tonight. So we should agree that we go through these steps. By the way, the statement 2 and 3 on your Coastal Commission, basically, we put the ordinance into effect without Coastal Commission's approval last time. This simply says, if we vote on it, it will require Coastal Commission's approval as one of the things to put it in effect, in addition to the council. So even though, yes, we are required to go to Coastal Commission, we are not required to wait on them. We could have put it in effect as we did the last time. This was a statement to say that we did not intend to do that and to agree on that. The second reason why it's here, besides so the transparency and when you get to weigh in, is it's a long process. And if indeed it's not going to get done by November of next year or whatever, as we've talked about, because of the various groups that weigh in, again, this was a direct to set out the steps and then create a calendar of when we thought we could, target dates that we thought we could get done and try to drive to those dates and be able to communicate where we were, what we've done, and so forth, in order to make it clearer that we were not a bunch of, a couple of people in the back room trying to come up with, some potion that we were going to, do something with. So this is not, there's nothing to do with political positioning here. I'm sorry that if you feel it came off that way. What it really was how do we want to agree to what we need to do to get this done and get on with getting it done?
Mr. Federico.
Paul, I appreciate the hard work you put into this. I would like us to make a commitment to write a good ordinance. I think that's what we owe the residents is we need to commit to them to put in the hard work to write the ordinance. Our residents have spent over 2.5 hours now. We could have been debating the nuances of a policy tonight. And I understand that the process may also be very just as much important. But nothing is more important than the policy. And we got to put that first in my mind.
Thank you. And just to respond to Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt, I don't disagree with you on that we should have a calendar that's saying how we're going to go through this. What made it feel political to me is to put the ballot measure on without anything in front of us. That bothered me. I'm not comfortable in making any kind of a commitment like that. I'm not committing to anything on a ballot until I know what I'm putting on the ballot. And so that's where it became political to me. And that's why I was making my comments. So with that, if there's no more, we'll go ahead and vote on Mr. Federico's motion. And to repeat it, it's to continue this until we have an ordinance to vote on. Correct? All right. All right, take the vote. And that fails 2-3 with Ms. Lewis, Mr. White, Mr. Vic-Sork in dissent. That brings us back to our original motion, which was to approve it as written. We'll go ahead and take that vote. And that fails 2-3 with Mr. Federico, Mr. Vic-Sork, and myself, Mayor Miller, in dissent. Okay, so that motion fails. That brings us to council reports. And reports including all city-related business. Mr. Federico.
Thank you. Interestingly, Paul, I appreciate all the hard work you put into this. I really wish we could have agreed to just debate this as soon as we had the policy written in front of us, but I guess we can still do that. I met with, since our last meeting, a number of the people that were involved in the town center plan, the original town center plan. And in our last few meetings, we had a number of discussion items about whether or not we should reconsider anything from the town center plan. And a number of those speakers who were involved at the time said that there were things in the town center plan that were happening that they never envisioned at the time. Anyway, a number of those members are willing to be involved in a town center plan residence committee 2.0, if you will, to look at implementation of the town center plan. And it's something that I want to let the council know I'd like to bring probably in January for us, or February after the new year, and to take a look at at our next meeting. The Doheny Village plan gets unveiled. I think planning has the opportunity to shift gears to that. So I'll be bringing something to look at in January or February.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lewis?
No.
Mr. Vic-Sork?
Nothing to report.
Mayor Pro Tem Wyatt?
I have turned in my list of meetings to the city clerk. I also took the opportunity to meet with Jason Chekhov, Raintree, after last council meeting because he brought some photographs, among other things, that we actually didn't get to. And so, in looking at the photographs, they didn't give me a clue as to what he had to say. So I thought I would just go ask him. His input on the various issues that they run into with the ordinance as written and what we could consider was helpful. As he pointed out, what happens when a lot slopes 12 degrees over the length of a building, or 12 feet over the length of a building, and various things to make it work out right, and what the implications of that are, or so forth. And he also had some reasonable recommendations. But he also made one other comment. While he feels that that some change like that related to the first floor height we were discussing should be considered, and we'd have to think it through carefully. He also said that until we were ready to spend more time and really work through a few deficiencies in the order and get a lot of weigh in, we shouldn't take it to the ballot, but he would be willing to be part of a group to work through. So I think that's a useful thing. The question really is, when's the right time for us to figure out when to put that together and go back and revisit those issues. And there are a couple that I don't need to bring up what his basic concerns are. We'll figure that out when we get the group of people together, but I did think it was a useful discussion. And with that, that's the only other comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I've turned in my list of meetings. I got them both in within 2 days. I've got it in under the wire on the last one. Want to remind everybody, we have Winterfest coming up on December 7th down in La Plaza Park. VFW will be having their cookout, and hopefully everybody can come down and see the tree lighting. If you get an opportunity on December 6th, we're actually going to have the RH Dana special needs students come down and see Santa and decorate the tree. That's a really special time. And December 9th, we'll have the tree lighting in Pines Park, and that's also another great event. And I know Miss Nelson with Capital Cares will be there, and always shows up with her pets and her neighbors. It's always a lot of fun down there. So I hope you guys all make it. With that, I want to wish everybody a safe and happy Thanksgiving. Have a great holiday, and we'll see you back on December 3rd. Mr. Denny, do you have any reports?
No, sir. Happy Thanksgiving.
Mr. Munoz?
This evening.
Thank you. The next regular meeting of City Council will be December 3rd, 2019 at 5 p.m. in the City Council chamber located at 33282 Golden Lantern. We're adjourned.